in terms of the national committee that they've convened to change the language in the interstate contract, which is encouraging. All right, so good. So we have an agenda before us. At this time, I'm going to ask that we introduce ourselves. And Scott, I'm going to ask that you lead that effort.
Scott Hertel, I'm the Bureau Chief of the Interstate Office for Department of Corrections. I'm also the Deputy Compact Administrator for Parole.
Our partner at Parole, Scott, is a great partner. Does a lot of work.
Thank you.
Morning, Mark Mishler, Counsel and Legislative Director for Senator Julia Salazar.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Julia Salazar. I represent New York 17th District in Brooklyn and Queens, and also chair the Senate's Crime Victims, Crime and Correction
And
Committee.
Senator, you drove all the way from Brooklyn.
I did.
God bless you. So I drove from White Plains, but Brooklyn's much further, so thank you.
I drove all the way from this unit, so.
Our friend John, the venerable John Watson.
John Watson, counsel to the pinch hitting 4-hour director, Elizabeth Brother.
Thank you. You got 2 birthdays coming up with your children.
Your birthday is coming up, been with the agency for, would be 18 years next month.
Yeah. Thank you. And our representative for victims, Lisa, would you introduce yourself?
I am Lisa Good, and I am the founder and director of Urban Relief, and we serve victims of violence and homicide in the Capital Region.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Really appreciate having you. Important voice on the commission. Great.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Darrell Towns. I'm the chair of the parole board, and happy to see my senator. We're both a long way from Brooklyn today. Good to be with everybody.
And thank you, Jim. Jim invited me over to address the parole board last month, I guess it was. And we went over and talked about reentry and the provisions of less is more, which authorizes the parole board to direct, highly recommend, an individual who is being considered for violation to enroll and partake in the services offered by reentry. So we thought that was a good connection to make. And I might add that I really appreciate the gentleman inviting us, and the parole board members were very, very receptive to hearing about the kind of reentry task forces that we funded overseas, 4 of them in New York City.
So we're going to have you back in 2024 so we can talk about Interstate as well.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Hi, good morning all. My name is Alejandro. I'm here on behalf of Mr. David Weprin. I'm his legislative director. He was the chair of corrections for 6 years. Still very much committed to criminal justice reform and has been here on his behalf.
Indeed, we know he is. Thank you for showing up. We appreciate it. Welcome.
My name is Matt Chardon. Hello, everybody. I'm Assistant Director here at the Office of Probation and Correctional Alternatives.
I'm Kelly Palmetier. I am the manager of the Interstate Compact Unit here at OPCA, and I am also the Deputy Compact Administrator for Probation.
Thank you, Kelly. And Kelly's going to introduce her staff, I believe, at this time.
Yes, we have a few members here today. We have Ebony Gardner, who is our newest addition, and we are very thankful that she decided to join us. She's doing fantastic. She has only been here for a week, but she's really interested in interstate work, and she's doing a great job, so we're glad to have her. We have Tyrone Cato. He has been with us for several years. He handles a section of the alphabet of adult probation and transfer cases under the ICAS. He also does fantastic work. And then we have Chip Tashin, Raymond Tashin. And Chip handles all of our juvenile interstate transfer cases that happen under the ICJ, which is the Juvenile Compact, Interstate Compact. And not with us today, we have Penny Belcher, who is a supervisor in the unit. We have Tracy Frazier, who also handles a separate section of the adult alphabet, and Shana Kern, who is a supervisor, compact office coordinator, and she could not be here today. So we're very thankful for our staff. They do great work. They're very busy people, and they do a good job.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, staff members. And I know that you've got our work to do, so we're not expecting you to sit through the whole meeting, although you're welcome. So we'll leave it up to your good judgment as to where you want to be, but don't feel like these people do a lot of work, very, very busy. And thank you for joining us. Thank you. And M&A, congratulations again. Really lucky to have you. So I wanted, under item 2, just to review the agenda. And, we still have 2 vacancies working with the Governor's Appointments Office. We do have a candidate who's been nominated by the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, Rowan Wilson, who is advanced the name of a jurist to the Appointments Office for consideration. And that is, I'm sure, will be approved. It's just in the final throes of the process, and we'll have a judiciary member at the next meeting. We still have a vacancy from the Senate. I think the Appointments Office is working on getting a letter of resignation from a former member, and we'll look forward to then making an appointment with the chairperson, Senate Pro Tem, and head of the Senate, the Honorable Andre Stewart Cousins, who was also my senator and member of the Board of Legislators from Mon County. So we're pleased that she'll make that appointment as well. Welcome on behalf of our Commissioner, Rosanna Rosado, and our Executive Deputy, Joseph Popkin. They're engaged in other meetings at this time, but certainly they know this is going on, and I have my monthly meeting with our Executive Deputy, Joe Popkin, later this afternoon, so I'll provide some progress of today's meeting. I'm just going to go through the agenda quickly. We've got the approval of the minutes, a reading of the statement. We will review probation and parole measures. We review those regularly, daily, monthly, and of course, present them to the New York Council to review. And then we'll get an update from Kelly on the Interstate Compact Offender annual business meeting and the business that was transacted in Norfolk, Virginia, September 18th to 21st. We'll provide an update on the victim notification. I know our representative Lisa Good raised an issue about victim notification, and then entertain any new business closing remarks. I do note the next meeting is May 16th, 2024. Any questions about the agenda at this time? So having heard none, we'll go ahead and review the minutes of May 18th. And I'm going to ask that we give members a few minutes to really read the minutes, because everyone in this room is a busy official. And we all have other jobs in this one. And so why don't we take a moment to familiarize ourselves and review the minutes of May 18th. So at this time, I would ask if I can have a motion on the floor to receive and approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was held Thursday, May 18th, 2003. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Second, Senator. Appreciate that. Seconded by Senator Julia Salazar. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any noes at this time, nays or abstentions? Having heard none, the motion passes. The minutes of Thursday, May 18th are approved as part of the record. Having heard that, we'll move on to our reading of the mission statement. A simple thing, but I always ask that we do so because it keeps us focused on the goal of our state council. So Kelly Volunteer, as Deputy Compact Administrator, would you like to read the mission statement?
Sure. The mission of the New York State Council for the Interstate Compact for Adult Offender Supervision is to serve as an advisory body to the State Compact Administrator and to make recommendations for the implementation of state policies and procedures that facilitate the effective tracking, supervision, and rehabilitation of individuals under community supervision, advance their orderly transfer across state lines, and promote public and victim safety.
Thank you. All right, so now we'll go on to the compliance measures, and I'm going to turn this over to Kelly and Scott on the compliance measures. And in your packets, you'll see the various, what we call the speedometers of the performance of the New York State interstate units, both probation and parole. So this is the dashboard, the famous dashboard. I just want to reinforce that, our state and all the states utilize something called the Interstate Compact Offender Tracking System. Again, the word offender, we're going to address that later. Doesn't need to be offender, but it's a tracking system, so it's a national database, and we all use that ICOT system. In turn, the national office has constant data, real-time data on the performance of states as we do. And so we take this pretty seriously. I should add that every other month, every 60 days, we have, quote unquote, a report out within the Office of Probation Correctional Alternatives where our managers report on all their data. They bring their data. As I say, in God we trust, everyone else bring the data, however. So bring the data, and they bring the data and present. Kelly does an extensive report really identifying problems and deficiencies. I'm pleased to say usually there are not, because we do so well. So Kelly, I'll ask that you go first and then Scott.
Sure. So the first copy that you have in your packet is the numbers for New York State as a whole, so that this is the combined compliance percentage for both our probation and parole transfers. So you can see that in the dashboard, you're provided with our state-specific compliance percentage as well as the national average. So in that first section, our case closure compliance, I don't know what's happening to me. Those case closures have to be submitted within 10 business days of the supervision end date of a probation case or a parole case. And so for New York State, we are 95.16% compliant, and underneath you can see the average days overdue. They also provide you with that information in this dashboard. The national average is at 96.4%. So we did pretty well. Passing what is considered to be sufficient compliance is 80%, and we are well above that. The case closure reply compliance, and that would be cases that the individual was placed on supervision in New York, had transferred that supervision to another state, and then that other state had sent a case closure to New York. We are required to respond to that case closure within 10 business days. So our percentage in that area is 96.8%. The national average is 91.6%. Request for progress report. When an individual has been placed on supervision in New York and transfers to another state, we can, or any state really, the receiving state is required to provide a progress report to the sending state within 30 calendar days of receiving a request from the sending state for that progress report. In that area, New York State is 97.47% compliant. The national average is 92.39%. For the reporting instructions, reporting instructions are requested and allow an individual to be present in the receiving state during the investigation of their transfer request. Those requests have to be responded to by the receiving state within 2 business days of receipt. For all cases, with the exception of those who have been identified as a sex offense, and in those cases, there are 5 business day timeframe for response. We are 98% compliant in that area. The national average is 97.8%. The transfer replies, the receiving state has 45 days to respond to a transfer request that is submitted by the sending state. So New York State is 94.36% compliant in that area. The national average is 95.22%. And then the violation response, when New York is the sending state and we receive a violation report requiring retaking from the receiving state who is supervising providing supervision for New York, we are required to respond to that violation report within 10 business days of receipt. And in that area, we are at 98.11% compliant. The national average is 89.44%. So that is our statewide numbers.
So that's the statewide, then we have to break it down by probation and parole. So just let me say that, the performance is pretty impressive. And keep in mind that in New York State, we have what we refer to as a federated state. We don't have a statewide probation agency like small states. We're a large state. Probation is performed by 57 counties and the great city of New York probation department. And so consequently, we're dealing with interstate designees in each of those 50 probation departments. So to orchestrate that type of coordination and perform at these levels is pretty impressive. I think you'll agree. Staff do a great job, and the designees are on a first name basis. So I go out and I go out often to speak to probation officers. They know our staff by first name, and they'll say they're wonderful, because no one really understands the interstate but your staff do. So, and all the rules associated with it. So that's the statewide picture. Any question on the statewide picture at this point before we go into the reports? And maybe if you have a question later, that's good.
Just one. And all these are great numbers. And who, if anyone, monitors the reciprocal, and we are the receiving state?
Well, when we're the receiving state, we monitor the reports that we're responsible for submitting. So we, as a receiving state, we would be responsible for submitting a reply to the transfer request, but we're monitoring that at our office here. And so we're working with the local probation departments, advising them on due dates for certain reports and following up with them to make sure that they're submitted and provided to the sending state on time. When we are owed a report from another state, we do receive emails and requests from the local probation departments. They'll let us know that they haven't received a report or that they're in need of something, and then we reach out to the other state to really, try to facilitate the submission of whatever they're missing. And Scott is probably.
The same for parole. We have our own interstate office. We have parole officers assigned to each state, and we have 2 senior parole officers and myself that are overseeing the work to make sure that we're giving and receiving the reports in a timely manner.
Are you looking for one specific item in here, like violations, which?
No, I'm just wondering, I think that we're outpacing the nation when we're sending people. And I was just trying to get a sense on how the reciprocal is looking, that when states are sending people to New York, how we're monitoring them, because, of course, we have mechanisms of monitoring our releases. I just wanted to make sure, just in the essence of public safety, that we're also keeping an eye on people come to our state.
The national office does audit the states annually on audit, there's certain measures to hold states compliant to those timeframes as well.
Yeah. So a couple of things, just keep in mind that interstate transfers, the sending state, the state where the crime occurred and where the disposition was imposed, retains legal jurisdiction. So that sending state will always have legal jurisdiction, and any real violation has to go back to that sending state. Person transfers to Wyoming's supervising that person. They would supervise that person in a a standard consistent with the standard of supervision they would their own. Same thing here. Person from Wyoming transfers to New York State. We're going to transfer that person according to a single standard of supervision. No less, no more. For any other person in interest of fairness, equity, etc. But the legal jurisdiction remains with the same state. On intrastate transfers between counties, we led an effort and were successful a number of years ago to make the transfer complete. So a person transfers from Albany County out to Erie because they have a brother or family they want to live with and start a new life. The whole transfer legal jurisdiction occurs in Erie and inherits the legal jurisdiction. And so the legal jurisdiction of the court would go from Albany County Court to Erie County Court. But we thought that was important because we wanted the Erie County judiciary to be able to respond swiftly and certainly to non-compliant behavior, not to have to send a probation officer from Erie County to come and testify in Albany County, as was the case. So a little different. I tried to do that at the national level, but our attorneys in the national office said that, I was failing to recognize state sovereignty, which I think they're right, and the Constitution. So we had to respect the Constitution and have them retain legal jurisdiction. Would have been much cleaner, much easier, but the rest is history. So good questions, though, really good questions, and thank you. I just would remind the members that compliance is really important. It seems like, you're very detailed in terms of how much we pay attention to this, but Matt and Kelly and I have been at national annual business meetings where states are not in compliance. If they don't turn their compliance around, the forum for non-compliance is federal district court, and the national office will bring them in and impose fines, $50,000, $100,000 until they come to compliance. So it's something we pay a great deal of attention to, both on the parole side and on the probation side, and ensuring non-compliance with the rules. Very, very important. But I'm going to ask Scott now to report, and then Kelly. And Scott, parole, you want to take us through the parole matters?
Sure. Thanks, Kelly, for explaining each section too, because I don't have to go through it now for my report. So, for the case closure compliance, it looks like we were 100% compliance, where the national office was 96.09.
So parole is the one with the 100% in the first dashboard, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And then the case closure response compliant, it looks like we were 96.27%, which was slightly above the national average of 92.01%. The progress report compliance, we were 100%, where the national average was 92.85%. Request for reporting instruction session looks like we were 100%, where the national average was 97.88%. Transfer compliance, we were 99.74%, where the national average was 95.44%. And the violation response compliance, we were 95.95%, where the national average was 89.92%. We're pretty fortunate in our office in that we're pretty heavily staffed, so we do try to keep a good eye on these statistics, and our staffing is there where we can actually keep a good eye on it. We've had a lot of turnaround, our whole entire office turned around this year, with the exception of 2 or 3. So I'm very fortunate to get very good staff that transferred into our interstate office. So these numbers are a reflection of my staff, not of me. So
I was going to say great leadership, though. So
Thank you.
it doesn't happen by mistake. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Scott on the parole side of the house in terms of the really great performance? And I know you did have a number of staff transfer, and COVID played into this as well, and retirements, et cetera. Thank you. Any questions for Scott at this time? All right, Kelly, do you want to report on the probation side?
Sure. As Bob had mentioned, these are all reports that are submitted by the local probation departments, and our office, works with them to make sure that that they're meeting the timeframes that are associated with each one of these pieces of correspondence. So our case closure compliance specifically for probation, at New York State, we were 94.45% compliant with case closures. The national average is 96.4%. Our case closure reply, so our response to a case closure, we're at 97.2% in that area, and the national average is 91.6%. Our compliance with progress report submission, we are at 97.06%. The national average is at 92.39%. Our response to request for reporting instructions, we're at 97.96%. The national average is 97.8%. Our response to a transfer request, we are at 93.65%, and the national average is at 95.22%. In our response to violations, we're at 100%, and the national average is 89.44%.
Thank you, Kelly. Excellent report. Any questions for Kelly or Scott on any of the data? By the way, how many cases do we manage, Scott, in the course of a year from parole side?
I honestly forgot to bring the numbers in. It's quite a few. We do keep track of the numbers in and out, but I wasn't prepared today with
No
that.
worries.
I do have, for the end of July, this is for the just strictly parole cases. There were 740 out about and 620 in.
So about 1,400 cases, a significant amount of activity. And on the probation side?
On the probation side, we have about 1,500 out. These are active supervision cases right now. This isn't how many we process in a month, but we have about 1,500 transfers out and 3,500 transfers in. So 5,000.
5,000, yeah. So it's a lot of activity, but very well done.
And just one last point, Mr. Haff. Hearing those numbers, that when you review these reports, please do consider we are one of the busiest compact offices in the nation. And we fluctuate somewhere between 5 and 7 of the busiest compact offices in the nation. So, you know, when we do look at these things, I don't know, 5 outgoing and 10 income, you know, we've gotten the numbers really that compared that with what Bob said about being a federated system and really working with probation departments. You know, I think it just speaks to such a great job that both Kelly and Scott do in keeping this compliance where it's at.
I will say, when you go to the annual business meetings, some of these small states have a lot to say with very few cases. And we're usually quiet and reserved, but they do follow what New York is suggesting in terms of open amendment and stuff, so we're pretty well regarded on the road department, which is a good segue into a report out on the annual business meeting. So if you'd like to do that, that'd be helpful.
Sure. So Scott and I attended the 2023 IKS annual business meeting in Norfolk, as Bob mentioned. It was September 18th through the 21st. At that meeting, the Rules Committee introduced one rule proposal, and I provided everybody a copy of that in your package.
And Scott, please feel free to jump in, because, you know, you represent the folks, so you always get some prepared remarks, but clearly, we want to hear from you.
So the Rules Committee introduced this one rule proposal, which the commission was to vote on at that meeting. That was a proposed change to Rule 5.108, which is titled Probable Cause Hearing in the Receiving State. We did review that briefly at our last meeting, but it's a simple change that happens in section F of that rule. You can see that they have struck the word shall and replaced it with may. And that change will allow states who are able to make warrantless arrests to place an individual in custody and to hold them in custody upon a finding of probable cause, and excuses those states without those powers from doing so. So that proposed change was approved by the commission with a 37-10 vote. So this new language will go into effect, I think they go into effect April 1st typically. They didn't provide a date, but April 1st of 2024, those changes typically go into effect. Are there any questions about the rule proposal or the rule itself and what that means for New York?
Can I
Scott,
just use comment on the proposal?
No, Kelly and I discussed it prior to coming to the meeting, so she's got it covered very well.
Can I just kind of give the council just a little background, what a probable cause hearing is, when they're used, so they have some context to understand.
Thank you.
Sure. So when an individual transfers their supervision under the Interstate Compact and they have violated the receiving state that is providing supervision, submits a violation report to the sending state requiring retaking that may result in revocation, that individual is to be afforded a probable cause hearing in the receiving state. And that is a hearing that is conducted by a neutral party to make a determination or to see if there's reasonable, what am I trying to say? Great, thank you, that there's probable cause that those violations actually occurred. So this happens mainly when there are technical violations that happen in the receiving state. And then, the sending state requests that the probable cause hearing be held prior to retaking. So in many of those situations, there's not already an active warrant for that person. So many states don't have the power or authority to take somebody into custody without a warrant. New York would be one of those states. And so we were not in compliance with this rule because the rule requires when probable cause is found that that person be taken into custody and held until the sending state decides how they're going to proceed with that individual, whether they're going to order them back to their state and allow them to come back on their own, or whether they're going to issue a warrant and retake by that method. Are there any questions? Yes.
I'm just curious, you said this we often result in technical violations, so you just.
Elaborate on that.
So can you repeat the question, just to be sure everyone understands?
Oh, yeah, so the question was, essentially, what does a technical violation mean? So when there's a non-compliance with the conditions that the receiving state could not address through graduated responses or sanctions, so it could be anything from a successful discharge from treatment, maybe after being referred to a treatment agency, was discharged, they were referred to another agency, discharged again unsuccessfully, maybe that would meet that threshold. It would be different for probation anyway in every county, because every county, probation's administered at the county level, so every county kind of has a different standard. I don't know about parole, I would assume it's one.
It's universal.
Yeah.
Our rules are universal.
So it would vary across states and across counties just within New York State. So oftentimes, New York maybe is the sending state and receives a violation report from a receiving state, and that violation wouldn't necessarily meet the threshold of revocation here in New York, but it does in that receiving state. So they submit the violation report to us. That might be something that we would request a probable cause hearing be conducted on.
Which is a right, it's a constitutional right, and we're trying to enforce, a universal standard, because New York does not violate individuals on supervision very quickly. We use a system, we have a regulation on that, it's Part 352. We don't even call it sanctions, we call it graduated responses, to try to encourage people to come into compliance before we file a violation. If you look at a violation rate, it's very low. If you look at the number of probation violations resulting in state prison, is exceedingly low. And the reason is that we have regulations that require a series of processes of consideration before we consider violating. Violating is a serious action to bring that before the judge. So we train our probation officers that way, and we have a high standard. We want to make sure that individuals out there being supervised in other states comply with the same type of standard before they violate.
And just one other clarification, violation requiring retaking. It is a violation of the conditions that require the sending state under the compact rules to come and take that person either by warrant or order in order to return back to the sending state. So this is another safeguard which really makes sure that if we are going to file a violation on a technical violation, that we're sure that this is a violation that would require that state to come take it. Because oftentimes you could be taking somebody out of their home state and bringing them to another state where they have no support. So this is just another safeguard in place to make sure that, you know, these violations are serious enough to meet the standard of retaking that person. Because we do recognize that retaking is a very serious action which impacts people's lives, you know, greatly.
And to just add on that, related, several years ago, we led the charge in amending what's called Rule 5.101 on those individuals who committed new crime. So a person transfers from New York State to my favorite state, Wyoming, again, of all places. And they're being supervised out there in the Midwest in Wyoming. And they committed a new crime for which they're convicted and they're incarcerated. And what would occur prior to the rule amendment would be following serving that period of incarceration, they would be retaken back to New York. Now think about that. They've started a new life in Wyoming because they're living with a family there, and yet we're pulling that person back. Why? To impose an additional sanction because they violated the terms of supervision. Well, under the new rule, what we've done is that we've afforded the sending state the option, the discretion for that judge to say, is it so necessary for me to have this person come back to New York State? For what purpose? Am I really going to impose an additional sanction, more jail time on this individual? They committed the crime, they were convicted in Wyoming, they served that time in Wyoming. I can allow that period of incarceration in the sentence that was imposed there some reciprocity. I will recognize that satisfies, I'm redundant, but that satisfies any period, any imposition of sanction that I would impose. That does two things. First and foremost, it doesn't uproot that person from the community they're living because they may be employed, they may have the support of a family. They may have come to New York State for what I call 15 minutes and gone to Broadway, committed a crime, and now they're returning to Wyoming. We have no privity with that individual. Their life is in Wyoming. It made no sense to take them back to New York State. And furthermore, it saves the expense of sending two probation officers out there to go retrieve them, only to come back where the judge might say, restore probation. So we afforded all of that, and we led that charge at the national level in amending that rule, and it was accepted nationally. So we're very focused on trying to create a climate in Minnesota that support the rehabilitation, the successful rehabilitation of people on both probation and post-supervision. Any questions about that? Yes?
Question. In regard to the New York State parolee who's in another state pursuant to the compact, so rules of less is more are applicable, so Wyoming essentially has to comply with New York's less is more rules, is that correct? In terms of ascertaining whether there's a violation.
Yeah, so
What to do with the violation.
the person's convicted in New York State, but now they're transferring again to my favorite state, Wyoming, their home state.
So they would fall under the Wyoming supervision rules, not the less is more rules here in New York State. They would fall under, if we were to take it back, they would fall under the less is more sanctions.
Right. So implicit in the application one for transfer is a lengthy acknowledgement, because it is important for that individual to understand that in transferring to another state, they're going to be bound by the
So I guess yes, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
follow up on this, but New York retains jurisdiction,
Yes.
so somebody could, based on what you just said, Scott, I guess I understand now that somebody who in New York committing the same sort of action that might result in a violation of parole might not be in custody under less is more, but in Wyoming might be in custody.
Correct. So the most common thing that we're running into from the other states are, we'll have our parolees in Wyoming, will be using drugs. Repeatedly, they'll put them in a program, they'll fill out, they'll use drugs repeatedly, that the pattern will continue, and then Wyoming will say to us, this is a violation regarding or requiring a retake. We've done everything we can with this guy. You got to take him back. Well, we can't issue a warrant in New York State under less is more for this because it's not subject to jail time in New York State. So we would have to direct the parolee back on a case like that, which has problems in and of itself because then the parolees can't get back here and then it kind of abscond. So that rule has been challenging for us with parole. The less is more sanctions, applying it to the other states has been pretty challenging.
As you might imagine, right? Because they have a different set of laws. But it's important in terms of, and I was on the rules, I'm on the rules committee, drafting that language to ensure that a person who's applying for transfer really understands the implications. Because not everybody places the state of New York, right? People have different standards of supervision and expectations. Although we try with the behavior requiring retaking, what we've tried to do is establish a national standard. And so when a person is transferred to another state, what we're trying to say to that state is, don't ask us to violate that person if in fact it's not behavior we would violate that person for. Now that only goes so far, as Scott says, because with repeated non-compliance, another state is going to say, look, you may not have violated them in New York State, but clearly we are, we want you to take them back. But we've tried to establish that national standard because prior to changing the rule years ago, what occurred is states, we had this crazy rule, we had to count to 3 serious violations. It sounded great, but the problem is states would hasten to find a violation in order to transfer back. They were what I called counting to 3 and didn't necessarily have the best interest of the client at heart. And so we established a national standard of behavior requiring retaking. Is it something, we said to our interstate offices, you have to police this. You have to talk to those other states and say to them, look, unless this is really something that we would violate, don't ask us to bring them back. But again, with less is more, it's frankly a little different in New York State in terms of the law we passed with respect to other states. I think that's a fair statement.
Right.
Any other questions, comments? So, this becomes a fascinating science. It is a science, understanding the rules. And I think we've made a lot of rule changes over the years. New York has made a lot of rule changes in leading the nation. I want to talk about language in a moment. But any other activities on annual business that you'd like to report out at this time, Scott or Kelly?
I just had a few quick points. I mean, the rules committee, so we did, the commission did vote and pass this proposed change.
37 to 10.
Yes. They also provided an updated rule proposal guide that they have, pushed out and released to members of the commission. And I think that the hope is that states will start really thinking about the rules, any proposed changes or ideas that they have, that they'll start that process early on. In the 2-year cycle, the rule changes happen in a 2-year cycle with voting occurring in the odd years. So they want rules to be submitted quickly or in the beginning of the cycle so that they can be properly vetted prior to attendance at the annual business meeting where the commission will be voted on. So they did release that rule proposal guide. We did attend a collaborative problem-solving session for commissioners and DCAs at the annual business meeting, and that was kind of small group discussions regarding 4 different topics. It was commissioner and DCA relationships, nationwide warrants and how your state is overcoming challenges with judges, the reporting instruction rule that we're running into problems with nationwide, and then, was that 4? I think that was 4. So there was a lot of good discussion regarding strategies and how to address these different issues, states' shared practices, which I shared New York State's probation's practice with regards to warrants and how we're handling those situations. And, you know, we were asked by several states across the nation to share our practice with them, so we did provide them with information on what we do here to address those issues. We also, then the national office also reported that the work group that they developed to explore the possibility of a language change and removing the term offender from the compact, that work group had made a final recommendation to the executive committee to replace the term offender with supervised individual, and that recommendation was approved. There will be no change to the commission's name or statute. There's no change to ICOTS, which is the Interstate Compact Offender Tracking System, which we all refer to as ICOTS, so they'll be keeping that name. States will not have to change their bylaws or their statutes, and there will be no change to past advisory opinions that were issued. However, over the next 12 months, the commission is going to work to change the language contained in any current publications and materials, and that new terminology will be used in all future documents. So that's a positive change.
So half a loaf, not the whole loaf, but I think it's a beginning, important beginning, because I asked the commission's speaker at the annual business meeting in 2022 down in New York City, and I expressed how we're proceeding in New York State, and I've asked the probation directors across the state to join me in beginning to use different language. Clearly in our office, everything we do in terms of language, the staff know that, because language and stigma are important. And it seems to me it behooves us to do everything in our power to try to support change, offender change, individual change, and changing the word from offender to individual. I think it's more respectful, it's more dignified of individuals' rights. And it's a small thing, but within our power. It's a small thing, but it's an important thing, and clearly within our power to do so. So we're changing our language in New York State. I asked the commission to establish a work group. They didn't check back with me. I think they were a little afraid of what I was going to say, but they did come up with, I think, a decent plan to begin. I do think that changing the name of the compact is important, because that's what people see. That's what the public sees. That's what's on the website, and we need to make change to that. I think they're still uncomfortable doing so because they're concerned that it would require all 50 states and the 3 U.S. territories to sign new local legislation. That's a big undertaking. It's like making a change to the Constitution, right? Getting the 50 states to sign separate legislation. Our enabling legislation 259NN would require us to change that in support of the new language. So I understand that, but I think this is an important beginning. And clearly we can do our part in New York State. So I was really pleased to see that go forward. And I do want to thank Scott and Kelly for attending the annual business meeting and representing New York State so capably as you did. Any questions of Kelly or Scott on any of the business meeting? Sounded like it was a busy session.
It was my first one, so I was just taking it all in and putting names to faces.
I thought it was a great experience. It was actually my first adult compact experience also. So yeah, it was nice to meet a lot of the people that I speak to on a daily basis and to make those connections in person. And I think that relationship grows and helps states, fosters better communication, I think, when you have that in-person meeting, so.
I agree.
And the annual business meeting, for those, it's the one time a year that the commission, all the commission members come together with commissioners and the deputy compact administration from all 50 states and the 3 territories. They come to one place, they meet in person, and they do their compact business at that time. So that's just a little bit of fear knowing what's a PDM or what's that.
Yes, the next one.
Where is the next one? Oh, when? I don't know the exact dates, but it would be September or October of 2024, and it's the adult compacts in Scottsdale, Arizona. So they pick a different region every year, so it rotates throughout the country.
And I think they had a reception on the battleship, is that right?
They did, yeah, it was nice.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Well, thank you. So that brings our attention to item E. Thank you for the report out. Scott Kelly did a great job there. Victim notification. We've been working on a system of victim notification. It's a difficult task, given the fact that probation occurs on a local county level, of course, and the city of New York. You're well familiar, many of the people in this room are familiar with the VINE system, victim notification for people leaving state prison. We looked into that, but given the connectivity that we have to do with the 58 departments, that was difficult. So we actually developed a proposal that builds off our existing case management system in probation called the Caseload Explorer system. We have a state and work from a manufacturer, and we have been shopping this proposal, which would cost about $80,000 to $85,000 to actually implement. So we are pursuing funding for that, working within DCGS to identify a funding stream to do so. The thing that's interesting is if we implement the victim notification system, it doesn't only have to be limited to Interstate. We could use the victim notification system for all individuals and supervision victims, particularly victims of domestic violence, victims of sexual offending, where we could build a notification. It would be simple in its information, so we'd look toward changing address. We would look for absconding, because those are the 2 important behaviors that a victim, I think, would want to be aware of. Changing address and absconding, a person leaves the authority of the supervising agency, as well as non-compliance of violation. So we try to keep the essential pieces of information down to a minimum. Further, we would notify the victim today using handheld devices. So it would be a text message to their iPhone, to their Android, if you're in business or using Android phones. But it would be a handheld device that they receive notification. So we are pursuing funding for victim notification. We have not secured it yet, but I've discussed it and had a meeting with our executive deputy, Joe Pocket, this afternoon, my monthly meeting where I'll raise it. But Lisa, you had raised this at your very first meeting about what are we doing for victims. So I want to give you some time in terms of question and follow up in terms of the identified need for this.
So I guess my thought about that was is that typically when we think of victim notification, it's in response to domestic violence or sexual violence, but we don't factor in injured shooting survivors or their families. And so whenever someone is injured in a shooting, there are layers of risk that can escalate after an arrest and conviction. Those families are, they don't really have a lot of recourse in terms of safety. And so, my concern would be is that if we're looking at victims, that we make sure that we're including them and giving them some priority as well because it's important that we look at the full spectrum of people who are being harmed, especially as it relates to violence. And people, after someone is incarcerated, families in the community live with a great deal of threat, a great deal of threat from the moment of arrest, all through court proceedings, and especially at sentencing and incarceration. There's always a continuum of threat and fear that is not always named, and no one communicates with them about any of the pieces. I have a case right now where there was an arrest made, and the victim was never notified that there was an arrest made, but meanwhile, their compensation case is held up, now closed, because of law enforcement documentation. But the DA has had the case for a while, and they're about to close it, and I mean, they're about to have a conviction, and the victim has never been notified. And, we've helped them move. But there was a lot of threat there, and wasn't a lot of recourse around like what can we do around this person's safety. So, she doesn't know what happened. I can't, what will happen. I can't advise her. I can't advise her mother about, what the next steps will be. So I think that there is still some stigma around who's victimized, and the stigma is we make assumptions about why they were victimized. And sometimes those stereotypes are accurate, but oftentimes they're not. But in any event, no matter the status of the injured person, it's the family that kind of lives with the repercussions, and that includes the homicide. The homicides are a little bit easier sometimes, but again, I sat with a family recently, person released. They were never notified, and this was a homicide. They found out the person was released on the news. I don't have anything to say to those folks except, how can we help you deal with the layers of trauma and sense of violation that you experienced when you're told that the system would help keep you safe, that if there was an arrest made, if there was a conviction, if there was an incarceration, that you would be safer.
So, a couple of things. One is you sensitize us to the fact that it's certain most violence and such, particularly with families still significant others prone to violence and risk, even after an arrest has been made. Of course, that person may be released, and the risk may even increase further, right? Now, this system would be, we do have, just think about this moment, we do have the VINE system in place for people living incarceration, right, both state and local. I think that's local as well with VINE. So there's a release mechanism and notification for that. This would be for people on community supervision, both pro and probation, although pro has, is in a better position to work with victims because it's one central agency, I would say. But still, this would be for supervision. What we lack is a system on those cases where a crime's been committed and a person's been arrested but then subsequently released. And of course, we know with bail reform, a lot of people are released, right, into the community. Their families are subject to witness intimidation, et cetera. So those are areas of genuine concern. I'm not sure we can.
But I'm talking about once people are incarcerated, the threat continues. Not talking about the people who are released on bail. I'm talking about when people have been incarcerated and they are in prison, or they're in county jail, and they're going to be there for a while, as the case moves through the court, that there is some level of threat. And again, it's very nuanced, but it's still there. I mean, for the people that we serve, I want to say 86% of our census, they may come to us because of a shooting or a homicide,
Right.
but probably 80%, about 75% of those people are also victims of domestic violence.
Yes.
And some form of sexual violence. So it's very intersecting, for us. But just specifically, if I focus on like the shooting part of it and just some of the things that we've seen kind of anecdotally around issues of safety, it's a question that does come up from families in terms of, like, okay, well, this person is incarcerated, we're good now, right?
Right.
And again, I'm still learning. I'm learning about, what you do and how it all works, right? I'm familiar on the alternatives to incarceration side. I worked in addictions for 20 plus years. I work very closely with parole and probation offices all across the state. So I'm knowledgeable about some of those things, but just specifically from this seat, it's just a safety thing, and I don't know what the answer is. I just know that when I target in on certain cases, it does come up, and I don't necessarily have, a good answer for people in terms of how we resolve it or settle it, or where we go to find that information.
I know it's a problem because I know that victims are fearful because I read the case files. I read every critical incident. I send them to staff to review, and what I see often is that we don't necessarily get a great response on victim impact statements, victims, and why is that? Why aren't victims responding so we can assist them complete a victim impact statement? Because they're afraid. Often they're afraid to come forward. So and what they tell our probation officers, either they don't respond or they say, I don't want to complete a victim impact statement. So there's a great deal of fear out there in the community.
Right, and I think there's the cultural responsiveness is also a part of it, right? Because, people need a certain kind of massaging and coaching and support. And I think that when we invite people to complete a victim impact statement, there's so much trauma and so much stuff. And so I can spend therapeutically, myself or someone from my team can spend 2 years working with someone therapeutically to get them safe and stable and functioning and all of the things that we say, okay, this is kind of what healing looks like after something tragic. And then here comes the court proceedings, right? And you're back at square one. But because they've had some time, right, we can kind of keep them stabilized. But there's something about the victim impact statement that can be very disabling and disorienting. And then when we get people to kind of pour their heart and soul out to it, then when they get a document back from the DA's office or from probation with a bunch of edits and all those kinds of things, and they weren't sure. And when I say they weren't sure, people sometimes don't remember what they're told, right, when you're explaining these processes to them. And when they get something back and they feel like a major portion of their story is missing, and then I've had people that we've done a lot of work with to get impact statements, and then they get to court and the statements aren't read, and they're like, I didn't know that was gonna happen, right? So I just think it's very, very layered, but, from our perspective, when you have a case, if probation has a case, at the PSI point, and they're trying to get all of the documents for sentencing, that, if there's no response, for around the victim impact statement, that is a good opportunity to reach out to the local victim service providers to see who has this case, and if there's some community outreach and engagement that could be done to actually get the impact statement. Because for the people that we've been able to do it with, their statements have been very impactful. It was meaningful. It was a meaningful process, but that occurred in a therapeutic context and not necessarily in a DA's office, right? And there are some differences.
Yeah, I agree with that. We should talk more about how, because we oversee the probation departments, how we can have probation departments work more effectively with victims organizations. Not only for victim impact statements, but for their own security. We do have a model victims policy for statewide that was developed with the probation departments, and a number of the departments have their own written policies. And that just came up this week because I'm on the National Standards Committee for the American Probation and Parole Association. And listening to the other states, we're developing national standards. They don't have a model victims policy, so it's about $70. I had seen it, I hadn't looked at it for years, but it's still there, so we sent it out to them. But policy is one thing, working day to day, hand in hand with victims organizations is another. So we should meet, and we had said this, coming to the office where we can.
I would like to see it. I mean, again, I think it can be, helpful the more information we have to either inform the process from the bottom up or interpret it for the folks from the top down, then that's useful to us from an advocacy position.
So let us send to the members of this group our model victims policy. It's a little dated, but it's still very solid and frankly ahead of what most of the states do not have. So we will share a copy of that with you, model policy on victims. And we'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Just one more.
Yes, ma'am.
Point on that. Lisa, I just want to thank you for speaking so clearly on the subject, as you have always done when I listen to you. But I just want to inform or remind the council members here that the Interstate Compact was born out of victim safety, out of Pat Hill, the tragic death of her daughter Peyton. And I would encourage council members, if you are not familiar with that, to go and use Google, might be another form to do that, but Google Peyton Tuthill or Pat Tuthill and look at that, because that's really the reason that this compact exists as it does today. I always try to get a reminder for people about Peyton and Pat's, Peyton's tragic death and Pat's struggle, and now, a national advocate on victim safety. So I do encourage council members to take a look at Pat talking about Peyton.
So let's do better than that. Let's send the members the link to the right information. By the way, Peyton Tuthill, was brutally murdered by an individual, and Pat Tuthill was so affected by it that, frankly, she was in bed for 2 years, and then she lifted herself up and said, "I want to make a difference." Because a person was transferred, and in those days, the Interstate Compact did not really have any structure or rules. And through her advocacy, they established the more formal rules that were adopted by all states, right? It's going on 20 years that New York State approved and passed into a New York State Executive Law 259 now, which is New York State's enabling legislation. Pat Tuthill and New York State are good friends. We've gone back a number of years. Her compelling story, I'll also say that she's a champion, she's a pioneer. She also went into prison systems and spoke to individuals in prison systems on homicide and the effects that it had on her family, but also worked to improve the lives of people within correctional facilities. She's really outstanding. And last year at the annual business meeting, Matt and I worked together to ensure that there was a panel of nationwide victim representatives. Pat Tuthill was on there, a gentleman from
California. And then for me, the most compelling was there was a victim of a stalking offense, and she really detailed kind of the intersection, interesting, because she, to get away from her victim, moved from state to state to state, and stalker continued to follow her throughout her travels. So I can send information on that. I've got 3 panelists that spoke with me, because they were very, very proud.
I'll just share that with you. I think you'll find it really interesting. It's compelling. I'm not going to mention much about the language we did before. Any new business that anyone would like to raise at this time? All right, closing remarks. I do have some closing remarks. It's bittersweet that I announced that I'm going to be retiring next year. I have 47 years in criminal justice system. I've been blessed with both a wonderful career, never a job, I should add, never a job, always a career, an application, a passion. How many people in life get to do that? In that respect, I think I'm the luckiest person I know. 25 years in Westchester as a director of criminal justice, assistant district attorney, a deputy commissioner of correction, many different roles in Westchester. And then I came to New York State and served 5 governors as the state director of probation. Came here as a deputy in 2002 and interviewed with each governor and was reappointed. So truly been blessed. And I say bittersweet because, as I said to my commissioner, Rosanna Rosado, our wonderful commissioner, Rosanna Rosado, probably the most difficult decision I've ever made, I said to the staff, because there's not really a day that I can recall that I didn't get up and wasn't excited about coming to work. This morning, I left my home at 5 o'clock in the morning to address the New York State Association of Pretrial Service Agencies that's meeting over in Troy at Franklin Plaza. But I was happy to do so. And I think we've done a lot of good here in the state. I think we're a national leader in probation, in parole too, I think. And we have a national standards group and frankly our regulations, which are individual sensitive and victim sensitive and progressive and evidence-based about how we treat people and build relationships of mutual trust, respect, and understanding so we can help people change their thinking and change their lives. I think New York State is a leader. So in 2024, early in 2024, I will be retiring. I'll continue to remain involved in the work of the National Committee. I'm a big Abraham Lincoln fan, so I'll continue to research and maybe write on Abraham Lincoln. There's only been 16,000 books written on Abraham Lincoln, and I'm thinking maybe the world needs one more, I'm not sure. But I wanted to tell you this in person. I'll send out a notice, you'll receive a letter that I wrote a couple of weeks ago about time moving forward, and so must we. I've been blessed with an absolutely wonderful wife who's been always understanding of my passion for this. So she's been really supportive of 3 children and now 3 grandchildren. So the family's increasing, which is wonderful as well. And I'll remain, I think, hopefully active in the system, but time to pursue some of the things that I haven't had time to do that I really do want to do. So I'll do that as well. But I just want to say that, my service to New York State over these 22 years has been really blessed. I think, as I look out across the state and county and Scott and those national forums, I think New York State is really an exceptional place to live, grow, raise families, and lead policy. I'm proud of New York State and proud of the position I've had. In closing, I'll just say that I think public service is an honor and a privilege. I think it's a public trust. I think the trust is, that we will do all in our power that we can to do good and improve the lives of others. So thank you very much. All right, and we'll see you in May.
I haven't said that in person because because other than that, I would have thought you were pulling a bait and switch. Because you were so convincing when I interviewed, and then, you put me in the hands of Matt, and